Hey guys, tonight we are going to listen to the silence, not the silence of your room, which is probably full of little sounds you've trained your mind to ignore. The soft electronic whir of a charging phone. The almost imperceptible hum of a digital alarm clock, its glowing red numerals patiently waiting to jolt you back into the present. The distant sigh of a refrigerator compressor kicking in. Your world, even in its quietest moments, is a world measured and dissected by the relentless, silent pulse of electricity and quartz crystals. Time for you is a number, precise, unforgiving, a known quantity, but just for tonight, let's leave it behind. Imagine you are standing on a dusty rooftop. The sun is a warm, heavy blanket on your shoulders. Below you, the city of Baghdad in the 9th century spreads out like a rumpled carpet of sandstone and clay. There are no power lines crisscrossing the sky, no distant thrum of traffic. The sounds are entirely different. The murmur of 1,000 conversations in a dozen languages drifting up from the crowded souk below. The rhythmic clop, 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 clop of a donkey's hooves on a narrow, winding street. The metallic clang of a coppersmith's hammer, softened by distance. And above it all, the rich, resonant voice of the muezzin, calling the faithful to prayer from the spiraling minaret of a nearby mosque. His voice is the only clock that truly matters to the city's rhythm. The sun is its power source. This is a world where time is not a sharp, digital number, but a slow analog arc across the sky. It is the changing length of your own shadow on the sun-baked earth. It is the depth of the water in a slowly draining bowl. It is the steady consumption of oil in a lamp, or the burning down of a knotted rope. Time is a process, a flow, a living thing. It is not captured. It is observed, and it's into this world of analog time, that you are going to sink tonight. We're going to explore a forgotten corner of history, a place of dazzling ingenuity that feels almost like science fiction. We're delving into the forgotten art of medieval Islamic clockmaking. These weren't the simple, ticking grandfather clocks you might picture. They were monumental, water-powered machines filled with intricate automata, golden robots, and whimsical, mechanical creatures that moved and chimed and performed, marking the fluid passage of the day with a theatrical flair that puts your little digital alarm clock to shame. It was a time of immense intellectual curiosity and scientific ambition, flourishing while much of Europe was still navigating the so-called Dark Ages. The Islamic Golden Age was a period of brilliant light, where scholars in cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba weren't just preserving the knowledge of the ancient Greeks. They were building upon it, challenging it, and inventing things that would echo for centuries. Of course, living in this vibrant, innovative world came with its own set of challenges. And just to be clear, you probably wouldn't survive it. Not for long, anyway. Your modern immune system, coddled by a lifetime of sterile environments and quick-fix antibiotics, would likely throw in the towel within a week. A simple scratch could become a fatal infection. A drink from the wrong well could introduce you to parasites that would make your worst food, poisoning experience feel like a pleasant memory. You'd have to get used to the idea that medicine often involved balancing the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, which sounds less like a cure and more like a very confusing juice cleanse. So yes, while the intellectual heights were staggering, the daily reality was rustic. But you don't have to worry about any of that. You are safe in your bed, a silent observer floating through time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support is what keeps this little corner of the internet quietly ticking along. And as you settle in, feel free to post your location and your local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is listening from. A global network of minds, all preparing to drift off to the same strange, historical place. It's 11:54 p.m. here in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. And the only sound outside is the gentle hum of the night. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey begins not with a clock, but with a book. You're in a vast library, the air thick with the sweet, dusty scent of aging paper and leather bindings. This is the House of Wisdom, or Beit al-Hikmah, the intellectual heart of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Founded in the early 9th century, it was more than just a library. It was a translation center, a university, a think tank, and a scientific academy, all rolled into one. Scholars from across the known world, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, gathered here under the patronage of caliphs like Harun al-Rashid and his son, Alman. They translated the works of Aristotle, Euclid, Plato, and Ptolemy from Greek and Syriac into Arabic, saving them from being lost to the ages and, in the process, creating a new, dynamic foundation for scientific inquiry. Historians still argue whether the House of Wisdom was a formal, centralized academy in the modern sense, or more of a loosely affiliated collection of scholars working under the caliph's patronage. Was it a single grand building with official faculty, or a more organic intellectual movement centered around the caliph's personal libraries and observatories? The truth is likely somewhere in between. A system less rigid than a modern university, but far more organized than a simple reading room. Whatever its exact structure, its impact was undeniable.
What?
A crucible of ideas where mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering were pushed to new and dizzying heights. You drift through the arched hallways, past scholars whom you drift. Through the arched hallways, past scholars hunched over texts written on precious paper, a technology that had only recently arrived from China. Their brows are furrowed in concentration, their lips moving silently as they decipher the words of ancient philosophers or draft new mathematical proofs. You feel the cool, still air of the library on your skin, a welcome relief from the imagined heat of the Baghdad sun. But why all this focus? Why this feverish, empire-spanning quest for knowledge? To understand the birth of the incredible clocks we're about to discover, you first have to understand the profound need for them. It wasn't a casual desire for convenience, like you feel when you wish your coffee maker had a timer. This was a need woven into the very fabric of their faith, their science, and their society. The most powerful driver, the one that echoed 5 times a day from every minaret in the Islamic world, was religious. The Quran instructs the faithful to perform the salat, the ritual prayers, at 5 specific times throughout the day. This is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, a foundational duty for every Muslim. But here's the complication. These times aren't fixed like 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. They are beautifully, poetically, and maddeningly tied to the movement of the sun. The first prayer, Fajr, is at dawn, in that subtle moment between the end of true night and the first light of sunrise. Dur is at high noon, just after the sun passes its zenith. Asar is in the late afternoon, traditionally determined by the length of shadows. Maghrib begins just after the sun has vanished below the horizon. And Isha is at night, once the last twilight has faded. Now, if you live in a small village, you can just eyeball it. You see the sun is setting. You go to pray. Simple, but what about a massive, sprawling city like Baghdad? What about an empire that stretches from Spain to India? For the community to function, for the call to prayer to ring out in unison, you need a standardized system. You need an official, someone with the knowledge to say, now is the moment. This created a specialized and highly respected profession, the muwakkit. This was the mosque's official timekeeper, a role that was part astronomer, part mathematician. The muwakkit wouldn't just glance at the sky. He would use complex tables, astrolabes, caldrons, to calculate the precise moment for each prayer, counting for the changing seasons and the specific latitude and longitude of his city. It was a job of immense spiritual and civic importance. Trying to coordinate anything without a reliable clock would have been an exercise in frustration. Imagine trying to schedule a business meeting. Let's meet by the eastern gate when the shadow of the Grand Mosque's minaret reaches the edge of the spice merchant's blue awning. It sounds wonderfully poetic, but it's a logistical nightmare if it's a cloudy day, or if the spice merchant decides to roll up his awning because it's getting windy. A society this large and sophisticated was straining against the limitations of its timekeeping technology. The gnomon of a sundial is useless at night or when clouds obscure the sun. A water clock might freeze in a colder climate or evaporate faster in the desert heat. They needed something better, something reliable, something that could run day and night, sun or storm. This religious need for accurate time was perfectly complemented by a scientific one. Astronomy and astrology in this period were two sides of the same coin. You couldn't be one without being the other. To the medieval mind, the movements of the planets and stars weren't just a celestial ballet. They were a form of divine communication, a map of destiny that could be read by the learned. Astrology wasn't just the vague, feel-good pablum you read in the back of a magazine. Today, you will have a conversation with an interesting person, possibly your cat. It was a serious mathematical science used to advise the caliph on the most auspicious moment to start a military campaign, sign a treaty, or even get a haircut. To cast an accurate horoscope, an astronomer-astrologer needed to know the exact state of the heavens at the moment of a person's birth. This meant knowing the time with as much precision as possible. You can picture one of these scholars in the Shamsiyya Observatory in Baghdad. The air is cool and still. The night sky, a vast dome of glittering diamonds. He stands on the stone floor, holding a heavy, intricate brass astrolabe, beautiful device, often called a star-taker. With it, he can measure the altitude of stars, determine his latitude, and tell the time. But it requires clear skies and constant, careful observation. He dreams of a machine, a device that could model the sky for him, something that could run continuously, tracking the sun and moon and stars, and perhaps even the planets on its face. A machine that would tell him the time even when he was asleep, or when a sandstorm had turned the sky to a hazy orange blur. The desire for this device wasn't just for prayer. It was for unlocking the very secrets of the cosmos. Scholars still debate the primary impetus for this horological race. Was it the pragmatic, empire-wide need for prayer, synchronicity, or was it the more esoteric pursuit of astronomical and astrological knowledge by the intellectual elite? In reality, the two motivations were inseparable. The same mathematics used to calculate the prayer times for the muwaqqit was used by the court astronomer to predict an eclipse. The tools developed for the observatory could be adapted for use In the mosque, it was a symbiotic relationship, a feedback loop where faith pushed science and science served faith. Finally, there was the simple, earthy need for administrative order. Running an empire is complex. You have courts, markets, and vast public works. All require scheduling. Legal disputes needed to be heard at appointed times. Market hours had to be regulated to ensure fairness and prevent chaos. But perhaps the most critical non-religious use for timekeeping was in agriculture, specifically in the management of water. In the Fertile Crescent, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, life was and still is dictated by the flow of water. Irrigation canals, or qanats, were the arteries of the civilization, carrying life-giving water from the rivers to the fields. For this system to work, water access had to be strictly and fairly rationed. A farmer upstream couldn't just dam a canal and take all the water he wanted, leaving his downstream neighbors with parched fields. Distribution was managed on a timed basis. Each farmer would be allocated a specific period during which they could open a sluice gate and divert water to their crops. How do you measure that time? You could use a simple water clock, a bowl with a small hole in the bottom, and say, "You get water for the time it takes this bowl to empty 3 times." This was functional, but it required constant supervision and was open to disputes. A more public, more official, and more complex clock could regulate this vital resource for an entire district, ensuring the system ran smoothly and equitably. It was a matter of social stability and economic survival, so you see, the stage was set. A powerful religious mandate, a burning scientific curiosity, and a pressing civic need all converged on a single problem: the measurement of time. The people of this golden age didn't invent clocks simply because they were clever engineers who liked to tinker, though they certainly were. They invented them because their entire world, from the deepest affairs of the soul to the most practical matters of state, demanded it. They had inherited the rudimentary timekeeping tools of the ancient world, but these were no longer sufficient for their grand ambitions. They needed a revolution. And so, they began to build. They had inherited the rudimentary timekeeping tools of the ancient world, but these were no longer sufficient for their grand ambitions. They needed a revolution. And so, they began to build. But they didn't start from scratch. No great leap forward ever does. The brilliant minds in 9th century Baghdad were standing on the shoulders of giants, peering back through the centuries to borrow the best ideas from the civilizations that came before. They were like master chefs who had inherited a pantry stocked with exotic and ancient ingredients from Egypt, Greece, Persia, and Rome. Their genius wasn't just in creating a new recipe, but in knowing how to combine these old ingredients in dazzling new ways. So, before we step into their workshops, let's take a moment to wander through this inherited pantry of knowledge. First, you find the oldest and most fundamental timekeeper of all, the sundial. In its simplest form, it is nothing more than a stick in the ground, gnomon casting a shadow. Thousands of years before our story in Baghdad even begins, an enormous stone obelisk, a monument to the sun god Ra, towers above you. Its long, sharp shadow creeps slowly across the paved ground, a silent, majestic hand on a divine clock face. As the day progresses, the shadow shortens towards noon, then lengthens again into the afternoon, its position telling a story to anyone who knows how to read it. It's a beautifully simple system, a direct conversation between the earth and the sun. The only problem is that the sun can be a fickle conversationalist, frequently refusing to show up on cloudy days and going completely silent every single night. The scholars of the Islamic world knew this, but they didn't discard the sundial. They perfected it. The simple stick in the ground evolved into a sophisticated scientific instrument. You see them crafting sundials from fine marble or polished brass, with complex curved lines etched onto their surface. These weren't just marking the hours. They were specifically calibrated to show the shifting prayer times throughout the year. The shadow's edge falling on the door line or the asar line gave the muwakkit a clear visual cue. They applied their advanced knowledge of geometry and trigonometry to make the sundial more accurate and more useful than it had ever been before, turning a simple shadowcaster into a precision tool for religious observance. But the real key to their future creations, the true ancestor of the mechanical wonders to come, was the water clock. Let's drift further back again to a quiet, cool chamber inside an Egyptian temple around 1500 BCE. The air is heavy with the scent of incense and damp stone. In the corner sits a large, slope-sided alabaster vessel. This is a clepsydra, which translates from Greek as water thief. You watch as a priest fills it with water from the Nile. There is a tiny hole near the bottom, and from it a slow, steady drip begins, falling into a catch basin below. Plink, plink. The sound is hypnotic, a patient countdown in the gloom. On the inside of the vessel are markings, columns of dots representing the hours. As the water level slowly drops, it reveals the current hour. It was an imperfect system. The water flowed faster when the vessel was full and slower as it emptied due to the change in pressure. But it had one revolutionary advantage over the sundial. It worked in the dark dot. Now, let's jump forward 1,000 years or so to Hellenistic Alexandria, a city buzzing with Greek ingenuity. Here, an inventor named Ctesibius looks at the simple Egyptian water clock and sees its flaw. The changing pressure is a problem of engineering, and he solves it with breathtaking elegance. He designs a new system. Water flows into a main chamber, the one with the hour markings, but it does so from a reservoir above it. This upper reservoir is kept constantly full, with any excess water siphoning off through an overflow pipe. This means the pressure of the water entering the main chamber is always the same, ensuring the drip is constant and the timekeeping is accurate. It's the same principle as the float valve in a modern toilet tanker. Simple, brilliant, self-regulating feedback loop that changed everything. But Ctesippus and his Greek and Roman successors didn't stop there. If the clock could be made accurate, why couldn't it also be made entertaining? They began adding features, transforming the humble clepsydra into a miniature theater. The float that rose with the dripping water was attached to a rod. This rod could push a small figurine, making it point to the hour on a painted panel. They used siphons that would suddenly empty a small container, creating a cascade of water that could power a whistle to sound like a bird, or make another figurine drop a bronze ball onto a metal plate with a loud clang. These weren't just timekeepers anymore. It was the absolute pinnacle of high-tech spectacle, a puppet show powered by plumbing. Roman orators would time their speeches in the forum with them. The term "acum dare," to give water, meant to grant a speaker their allotted time. You can just imagine a lawyer trying to rush through his closing arguments before the final clang, a very real deadline enforced by gravity itself. Their task was to synthesize them, to scale them up, to infuse them with a level of mechanical complexity and artistic vision that the world had never seen before. They had the blueprints of the ancients. Now they were ready to draw their own. The age of simple drips and shadows was coming to an end. The age of the glorious, automated, monumental water machine was about to begin. The age of simple drips and shadows was coming to an end. The age of the glorious, automated, monumental water machine was about to begin, and to witness its dawn, you must return to Baghdad, to the vibrant, intellectual ecosystem of the House of Wisdom. But this time, you drift past the quiet libraries and serene courtyards full of debating philosophers. You follow a different kind of sound. Not the rustle of paper, but the soft, rhythmic tapping of a small hammer on brass. The hiss of steam from a heated vessel. The low murmur of brothers conferring over a complex diagram drawn on parchment. You are entering one of the workshops, the places where theory was hammered and soldered into reality. Here, in the mid-9th century, the undisputed rock stars of practical mechanics were three brothers known as the Banu Musa, or the sons of Musa. Their names were Muhammad, Ahmad, and Al-Hazan. Their father, Musa ibn Shakir, had been a scholar and a trusted friend of the future Caliph Al-Man. When their father passed away, the Caliph himself took the boys under his wing, becoming their patron and guardian. They were given the best education money and influence could provide. And crucially, they were given the resources and the freedom to pursue their unique passion, figuring out how things work. While all three were brilliant, they had their specialties. Muhammad was the master of mathematics and astronomy. Al-Hazan excelled at geometry. But it is Ahmad, the middle brother, who you see now, the one who seems most at home amidst the clutter of tools and half-finished contraptions. He was the engineering genius, the one who could see the invisible forces of air pressure and water flow and bend them to his will. Together, they authored a book that would become a landmark in the history of technology, the Kitab al-Hil, or the Book of Ingenious Devices. This wasn't a dry academic text. It was a stunning catalog of around 100 inventions, each one described with intricate diagrams and explanations. And as you peer over Ahmad's shoulder at a page, you realize these are not grand public works. They are smaller, more personal, more whimsical. They are machines designed to delight, to surprise, and to automate the little tasks of life with an almost magical flair. You watch as he tinkers with one of their famous inventions, a self-trimming lamp. It looks like a simple oil lamp, but inside is a hidden mechanism of floats and gears. As the oil is consumed and the wick burns down, a system of rods and levers, powered by the heat of the flame itself, slowly pushes the wick outward, and a blade snuffs the blackened, used portion, ensuring a clean, steady light. It's a solution to a minor annoyance, but the thinking behind it is revolutionary. It's a self-regulating, autonomous machine. They were masters of the high-tech party trick. You can almost see them demonstrating another of their devices for guests of the Caliph. It's a large, elegant pitcher. One of the brothers pours clear water into an opening on the top. He then turns to a guest and asks what they would like to drink. He tips the pitcher, and out comes not water, but cool, red wine. Then, for the next guest, he tips it again, and this time it pours white wine. And for a third, it pours a mixture. Of the two, the guests would have been baffled, suspecting sorcery. But the secret lay inside. A series of sealed chambers and cleverly angled pipes that kept the liquids separate and allowed the pourer to select the output simply by controlling the airflow, two tiny holes hidden under his fingers. It's the kind of stunt that would make you a legend at a dinner party, or possibly get you investigated, depending on the temperament of your audience. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about how many of the devices in the Book of Ingenious devices were purely theoretical thought experiments versus how many were actually constructed and demonstrated. Like the famous notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci centuries later, it's possible that some were brilliant concepts that never left the page. But many, especially the fountains and trick vessels, show such a practical understanding of hydrodynamics that it's almost certain they were built. Perhaps their most fascinating invention, the one that whispers most clearly to the future, was their mechanical flute player. You see a life-sized model of a musician sitting before you. It is powered by a water wheel, which turns a large, rotating cylinder covered in small pegs. As the cylinder turns, the pegs strike a series of levers. These levers, in turn, control the flow of air from a bellows through a flute playing a specific melody. It is arguably the world's first programmable machine. By simply changing the position of the pegs on the cylinder, you could change the tune. This wasn't just a toy. It was an attempt to mechanically replicate a complex human skill. It was the great-great-grandfather of the music box, the player piano, and in a very real sense, the digital computer, which also operates by reading a coded series of instructions. Now, you might be thinking, what do self-trimming lamps and musical robots have to do with clocks? The answer is everything. The Banu Musa brothers were mastering the essential vocabulary of automation. To build their devices, they had to perfect components that are absolutely critical for a sophisticated clock. They created the first known conical valve, a component still used in controls today, allowing for fine-tuned flow of air or water. They developed complex systems of siphons that could be set on a delay, creating an action that happened long after the initial trigger. They understood feedback mechanisms, where a machine could sense its own state, like the oil level in the lamp and adjust its own behavior. They may not have built the kind of grand, monumental clocks that would come later, but they were creating all the necessary parts. They were like musicians perfecting their scales and chords before attempting a symphony. Their work with delayed siphons, floats, and valves was the foundation upon which the great clocks would be built. They showed that water and air pressure could be harnessed to do more than just drip from a bowl. They could power a whole series of complex, sequential, and automated actions. You watch them for a little longer. The three brothers working in a comfortable, collaborative rhythm, their minds fizzing with new ideas. They were problem solvers, tinkerers, and dreamers. They took the simple principles they inherited from the Greeks and supercharged them, creating devices that were more complex, more reliable, and frankly, more fun than anything that had come before. They laid the crucial groundwork. They wrote the first chapter in the book of Islamic automation. But their work was a collection of brilliant short stories. The world was now waiting for someone to come along and use that same language to write an epic. But their work was a collection of brilliant short stories. The world was now waiting for someone to come along and use that same language to write an epic. For that epic, you have to let go of 9th century Baghdad. Allow the image of the Banu Musa brothers in their workshop to dissolve, and let yourself drift forward through time. You travel across 300 years, a silent, sleeping passenger on the river of history. The landscape below you changes. You float east, leaving the plains of Mesopotamia for the rugged, hilly country of Upper Mesopotamia, the region known as Al-Jazari, from which our hero gets his name. You land softly in the year 1206 in the formidable walled city of Diyarbakir, in what is now southeastern Turkey. The city is the capital of a dynasty of Turkmen rulers known as the Artukids. And here, in the service of the Artukot court, you will find the man who elevated mechanical engineering to a high art. His full name was Badi Al-Zaman Abu Al-Zaman Ibn al-Razaz Al-Jazari. It's a magnificent, rolling name, the kind of name you get when everyone is pretty sure you're destined for great things. For the sake of our collective bedtime brainpower, we'll simply call him Al-Jazari. Unlike the wealthy, scholarly Banu Musa brothers who grew up in the Caliph's court, Al-Jazari was from a different world. He was a craftsman, an artisan. The title he held was Ra'is Olemo, which translates to head of the works or chief engineer. It was a practical, hands-on job that he had inherited from his father, who had held the same post before him. He wasn't a theoretician who dabbled in mechanics. He was a master engineer who, at the end of a long and successful 25-year career, was commended by his patron, the King Nasir al-Din Mahmud, to write down everything he knew. The result is his masterpiece, a book with a title as grand as his name. The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. And if the Banu Musa's book was a brilliant collection of notes and diagrams, Al-Jazari's is a full-blown production. You can see it before you now. It's a large, handsome volume. As you open it, you see not just dense lines of elegant Arabic script, but page after page of beautiful, colored illustrations. These aren't just sketches. They are detailed engineering blueprints, a visual guide to construction. He shows devices from multiple angles. He labels parts with letters. He uses color to differentiate components. His intention was crystal clear. He didn't just want you to admire his genius. He wanted you to be able to build his machines. There's a pride and a profound practicality in a fascinating debate among historians of technology is whether Al-Jazari had access to the Banu Musa brothers' work. He never mentions them by name, yet many of the underlying principles, conical valves, feedback mechanisms, tipping buckets are present in his work, often in a more advanced form. Did he read their book and decide he could do better? Or did these ideas travel through an undocumented chain of craftsmen over the centuries? Or was he simply such a genius that he independently arrived at the same conclusions? No, for sure, but the lineage, whether direct or indirect, seems undeniable. As you turn the lavishly illustrated pages, you see the sheer breadth of his talent. The book is neatly organized into 6 categories, a testament to his methodical mind. There are chapters on clocks, of course, but also on trick vessels and elaborate fountains, much like the Banu Musa, but he also includes chapters on more practical machines, like powerful, crankshaft-driven devices for raising water from a river to irrigate fields or supply the city. It's like if a brilliant watchmaker also spent his weekends designing industrial-grade irrigation pumps to get a sense of his theatrical flair. You can just imagine him demonstrating one of his most charming inventions, the peacock fountain, for ritual hand-washing. A wealthy guest would approach a large, ornate fountain, at the top of which sits a beautiful mechanical peacock. When the guest pulls a small lever, water begins to pour from the peacock's beak into a basin below, allowing for washing. As the basin fills with used water, the weight triggers a hidden mechanism. A float rises, and a small door behind the peacock opens, and out slides a figurine of a servant, offering a fresh towel in its outstretched hands. It's the most gloriously over-engineered hand-washing station in history. You arrive expecting a simple tap, and you get a small, silent, robotic butler. This single device shows the Al-Jazari signature, a combination of practical function, washing hands, sophisticated mechanics, floats, levers, and hidden automata, and a delightful, surprising, artistic presentation. Every machine was a piece of functional art, but it is the clocks that are his true legacy. He described several, from relatively simple candle clocks with automated features to colossal, monumental water clocks that were the centerpieces of the Artuqad court. These were the symphonies that the Banu Musa scales and chords had been leading towards. They were complex, multifunctional machines that didn't just tell the time. They displayed the zodiac, tracked the sun and moon, and put on an hourly show of moving automata. So now, with the magnificent book open in your mind's eye, you gently turn past the fountains and the water-raising machines. You arrive at the chapter on monumental water clocks. Your eyes scan past the castle clock and describe clock until they land on the most magnificent, most complex, and most famous of them all. There, depicted in brilliant gold, blue, and red, is his crowning achievement. It is a machine that is part clock, part multicultural statement, part mechanical zoo, and all genius. There it is, the elephant clock, and it is here that we must pause and gather our senses before we attempt to understand it piece by piece. There it is, the elephant clock, and it is here that we must pause and gather our senses before we attempt to understand it piece by piece. Let your mind focus on the illustration in Al-Jazari's book. It's a riot of color and activity, a machine so layered with meaning and motion that it's almost overwhelming. This isn't just a clock. It's a Rube Goldberg machine with a PhD in art history. It's a statement, a mechanical celebration of the cosmopolitan world Al-Jazari inhabited. So let's build it slowly from the ground up, just as he must have done. The foundation of it all, the grand, solid base, is the elephant, a magnificent, life-sized Asian elephant, caparisoned with rich Persian-style carpets. The elephant, of course, represents the power and royalty of India, a land of ancient wisdom and legendary wealth. But its massive body is not just for show. It is the engine room. Hidden deep within its belly is the clock's heart, a large, precisely engineered metal bowl, floating in a hidden reservoir of water. This is the main timer. Water from the reservoir drips into this bowl through a small, calibrated spout. As the bowl fills, it slowly, silently sinks. The entire complex sequence of events that marks the time is all waiting for this one bowl to become full enough to tip over. It's a quiet, patient, hydraulic secret. Hidden inside the powerful beast, atop the elephant, sits an elaborate castle. A howdah, its architecture evoking the turrets and balconies of the Islamic world. And inside this castle, we find our cast of characters. In a high balcony sits a figure Al-Jazari calls the scribe. He holds a pen, and in front of him is a semicircle of 7.5 degrees, marking the minutes. His job is to be the minute hand. Seated higher still in the main turret of the castle is a regal figure, often interpreted to be the great Sultan Saladin, a symbol of Islamic leadership and authority. He sits behind 2 closed doors, waiting for his cue. Now, look higher still, to the very dome of the castle. Perched there, resplendent, is a mythical phoenix. This beautiful bird, which is consumed by fire and reborn from its own ashes, is a powerful symbol from ancient Egypt, representing renewal and the cyclical nature of time itself. It sits on its nest, ready to spin and cry out when the hour turns. The multiculturalism doesn't stop. Flanking the castle are two other key players. From the base, two enormous, stylized serpents, their design reminiscent of Chinese dragons, rise up on either side. Their heads are poised just below the castle's ramparts, their mouths open, waiting. And just above them, perched on the castle, are two falcons. Falcons were central to the hunting traditions of the Central Asian steppes, the ancestral homeland of the Artukat rulers Al-Jazari served. Their role is mechanical and precise. They are the keepers of the ammunition. Tucked away inside each falcon is a magazine of small, polished bronze balls. And finally, guiding this entire menagerie is the mahout, the elephant driver. He sits on the great beast's head, dressed in the style of an Indian rider, with a mighty axe in one hand and a cymbal striker in the other. He is the percussionist in this mechanical orchestra. So there you have it, the static display. An elephant from India, serpents from China, a phoenix from Egypt, falcons from Central Asia, and human figures representing the Islamic world, all united in one glorious, complicated machine. Now, let's watch it work. For 30 minutes, nothing appears to happen. The only movement is the silent, invisible dripping of water into the hidden bowl inside the elephant. You can almost feel the tension building, the slow accumulation of weight. Then the moment arrives. The bowl fills, its center of gravity shifts, and it tips over with a sudden glug, spilling its contents back into the main reservoir. The tipping motion does one crucial thing. It yanks on a web of hidden strings. Instantly, the show begins. A string pulls a lever that causes the phoenix on the roof to spin and emit a whistle. Another string travels up to the main turret, causing the figure of Saladin to swivel. As he turns, his hands, which were hidden, are revealed. One hand makes a gesture, and the other triggers a second mechanism. This causes one of the two falcons to lean forward, opening its beak and releasing a single, gleaming bronze ball. The ball falls. It drops directly into the open mouth of the serpent waiting below. The weight of this small ball is just enough to tip the serpent's head forward on a delicate pivot. As the serpent's head descends in a graceful, mechanical bow, it does three things at once. First, its journey downward pulls on another string, this one connected to the mahout on the elephant's head. His arm jerks into action, striking a sharp, clear clang from the cymbal. Second, the serpent's open mouth is guided over a small vase hidden in the saddle blankets, and the bronze ball drops out with a satisfying clink, ready to be collected and returned to the falcon's magazine later. And third, The final movement of the serpent pulls on a chain that yanks the naughty tipping bowl back into its original upright position, ready to start filling for the next half hour. Whole system scrapes across his board, marking that 30 minutes have passed. The entire performance takes just a few moments. A spin, a whistle, a turn, a drop, a clang, a clink, and then silence again for another 30 minutes. The whole Rube Goldbergen ballet, all to mark the passage of half an hour. The goal wasn't just to know, it was 3:30. The goal was to be so thoroughly entertained and impressed by the process of finding out that you completely forgot what you needed the time for in the first place. What's even more astonishing is that this clock was designed to work on temporal hours. In the pre-modern world, an hour wasn't a fixed 60 minutes. The time from sunrise to sunset was always divided into 12 equal daylight hours, and the time from sunset to sunrise into 12 night hours. This meant a daylight hour in the summer was much longer than one in the winter. To account for this, the elephant clock had to be recalibrated twice a day. The muwakkil, or a trained technician, would have to change the position of the spout dripping into the tipping bucket, altering the flow rate to match the changing length of the hours for that specific day. It's the ultimate high-maintenance timepiece. Scholars and engineers who have tried to reconstruct the clock still debate the exact mechanism of some of its parts. How did the falcon's beak release only one ball at a time? What sort of damping system did the serpent use to ensure a smooth, graceful pivot instead of a jarring clunk? Al-Jazari's diagrams are brilliant, but they leave just enough ambiguity to keep modern engineers guessing. A final little puzzle from a master of a forgotten age. Al-Jazari's diagrams are brilliant, but they leave just enough ambiguity to keep modern engineers guessing. A final little puzzle from a master of a forgotten age. But the elephant clock, as magnificent as it was just one chapter in his book, one sublime symphony in a vast repertoire. To truly appreciate the scope of his genius, you must gently turn the page in your mind and let your eyes wander over the other marvels he so meticulously designed, built, and documented. His creativity wasn't confined to a single masterpiece. It flowed into dozens of devices, each with its own personality and its own clever mechanical soul. Let's look first at another of his monumental water clocks, the so-called castle clock. Imagine a facade over 11 feet wide, crafted to look like the golden gate of a grand castle. Across its top is a zodiac circle, and below that, a row of 12 ornate doors. Below that, another row of 12 glass roundels. And at the bottom, a line of mechanical musicians, 2 drummers, a cymbalist, and a harpist all standing at the ready dot. At the dawn of a new day, the show begins. All the glass roundels are dark, but as the first hour passes, the first roundel on the left magically illuminates, its color changing from dark to a bright, shining gold. High above, 2 mechanical falcons lean out from a balcony and drop balls from their beaks onto a clangorous cymbal. Then, the first door on the top row swings open, and a small mannequin, a little figure representing the hour, appears down. Below, the robotic orchestra springs to life. The drummers raise their sticks and strike their drums. The cymbalist clashes his cymbals. Every hour, a new set of doors would open, a new roundel would light up, and the world's most punctual, if least spontaneous, jam session would play its tune. Hidden behind this beautiful facade was a mechanical brain of breathtaking complexity. The power, as with the elephant clock, came from a large, hidden water wheel and a system of floats. But the true genius here was Al-Jazari's masterful use of a component that would become fundamental to engineering: the camshaft. They are simply 2 different, equally brilliant answers to the same ancient question: what time is it? But sometimes, the answer to that question wasn't just for the person asking. Sometimes, the answer was a message in itself, a message of power, of sophistication, of a civilization so advanced that its very gifts seemed like a form of magic. These clocks weren't just instruments. They were weapons of soft power deployed in a silent, chess-like game of international diplomacy. To see the most famous example of this, we have to travel back in time once more. Let the ticking of Taqi Alden's escapements fade. Let the memory of Al-Jazari's workshop recede. We must drift back past them both, back to the early 9th century, to the very height of the Abbasid Caliphate, and the court of its most legendary ruler, the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the same caliph who features in so many of the 1001 Nights Tales. The year is 807. You are no longer in the sun-baked cities of the Middle East. Instead, you find yourself in the chilly, damp, stone-walled palace of Aachen in what is now Germany. This is the heart of the vast but rustic Carolingian Empire, ruled by the most powerful man in Europe, Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor. His court is a world of timber, wool, and iron. It is a place of immense military might, but it is not a center of sophisticated mechanical science. For several years, these 2 great leaders, Charlemagne and Harun al-Rashid, had been in communication. They had a common rival in the Umayyad dynasty ruling from Cordoba in Spain. And this shared interest led to a series of embassies traveling the immense distance between Akhan and Baghdad. Historians still debate the true diplomatic purpose of these gift exchanges. Was it a genuine attempt at forging a strategic alliance against their common foe? Or was it more of a global power play, a way for each ruler to show off their wealth, influence, and cultural superiority to the other without ever having to draw a sword? Whatever the motive, the gifts were magnificent. Charlemagne sent fine woolen cloaks from Frisa and prized hunting dogs. Harun al-Rashid, in return, sent fragrant spices, luxurious silks, intricate chess sets, and most astonishingly of all, an actual living elephant named Apolabus, who became an instant celebrity in the Frankish court. But the centerpiece of the caliph's gifts, the item that would be spoken of for generations, was a clock. You are there in the throne room as the caliph's ambassadors present it. It is an enormous and breathtaking water clock, constructed from finely worked brass inlaid with gold. On its face are 12 small doors, representing the 12 hours. Charlemagne's courtiers, bearded men in heavy tunics, gather around, murmuring in awe and suspicion. They watch and they wait as the first hour passes. A mechanism inside whirs into life. The first of the 12 doors swings open, and a single, small bronze ball drops out, landing on a brass cymbal at the base with a clear, resonant chime. Clang, 1 o'clock. The Frankish nobles gasp. 2 o'clock, the second door opens, and 2 balls drop out. Clang, clang. This continues all the way up to the 12th hour. But that's not all. As each hour strikes, a number of mechanical horsemen, one for each hour, emerge from 12 small windows, parade across the front of the clock, and then disappear back inside. Then, at the stroke of noon, all 12 knights emerge at once, and all 12 doors dramatically slam shut with a great clang, signaling the end of the 12-hour cycle. The reaction in Charlemagne's court was one of utter bewilderment. The chronicler Einhard, the emperor's own biographer, described the scene. He and his fellow courtiers simply could not comprehend the mechanism. They peered at it, whispered about it, and ultimately concluded that it must be the work of sorcery. They were convinced, he wrote, that there must be a tiny man, a diabolus or devil, living inside the brass casing, whose job it was to throw the balls and open the doors. It was the only explanation that made sense to them. It's like showing a modern smartphone to someone from the early 19th century. They wouldn't praise your skill in microengineering. They would accuse you of witchcraft and probably try to dunk you in a river. This single object, more than any ambassador's speech, delivered its message loud and clear. It said that the world of Baghdad was a world of wonders, a place where artisans could bend metal and water to their will, creating marvels that seemed supernatural to the most powerful men in Europe. It was a demonstration of a knowledge gap, so profound it might as well have been magic. It was a masterpiece of diplomatic one-upmanship. Charlemagne sent some very nice dogs in cozy blankets. Harun al-Rashid sent a live elephant and a magic robot clock. You have to admit, Baghdad definitely won that round. The story has a rather sad and telling postscript. The elephant Abyl-Abbas lived for another few years in Europe, a constant, walking reminder of the caliph's power before dying of what was likely pneumonia after a swim in the Rhine. And the clock, it ticked on for a time, a source of endless fascination and dread. But eventually, as all complex machines do, it broke down. And there was no one in Charlemagne's entire empire who had the faintest idea how to fix it. No one dared open the back for fear of releasing the little demon they believed lived inside. So, it simply sat there, a silent, beautiful, broken monument to a technology they could not begin to comprehend. For the rest of its days in Aachen, it was the world's most sophisticated and intimidating paperweight, a quiet testament to a distant and dazzling golden age. Section 11. For the rest of its days in Aachen. It was the world's most sophisticated and intimidating paperweight, a quiet testament to a distant and dazzling golden age. So, there it sits in your imagination, a silent monument to a technology gap. And it raises a crucial question. If a gift of such brilliance couldn't be understood or repaired, how did that knowledge ever cross the divide? How did Europe eventually learn the secrets that Harun al-Rashid's engineers knew? The answer is that the knowledge couldn't be gifted in a box. It had to be sought out, translated, and absorbed, often through messy and roundabout channels. The real transfer of technology wasn't a single grand embassy, but a slow, centuries-long process of cultural osmosis along the porous borders where the Christian and Islamic worlds met. To follow these streams of knowledge, your journey must now take you south, away from the cold forests of Germany and across the jagged peaks of the Pyrenees Mountains. You arrive in Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain. For centuries, this was not the homogeneous Catholic Spain we know today, but a vibrant, multicultural society. In cities like Cordoba, Toledo, and Granada, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian communities lived side by side. Historians fiercely debate the nature of this conviventia, or coexistence. Was it a truly tolerant, multicultural paradise, as some romantic accounts portray it? Or was it a more pragmatic and often tense arrangement, with non-Muslims living as protected but heavily taxed and restricted minorities. The reality was likely complex and shifted over time. But one thing is certain. It created an environment where ideas could and did cross religious and cultural lines. The most important conduit for this exchange was the city of Toledo. When the Christian king Alfonso VI conquered Toledo from its Muslim rulers in 1085, he didn't burn its libraries. He and his successors recognized the immense intellectual treasure they had captured. The city became a magnet for scholars from all over Europe who flocked there to gain access to the wisdom of the Arab world. This led to the formation of what is now called the Toledo School of Translators. Picture the scene in a cool, sun-dappled room in an old Moorish palace. A team of scholars is hunched over a manuscript. There might be a scholar monk from England who knows Latin, working alongside a local Mozaraba Christian who speaks Arabic as his native tongue, and a Jewish scholar who is fluent in both Arabic and Hebrew, and perhaps a Romance vernacular as well. Together, they painstakingly work their way through a text, arguing over the precise meaning of a technical term in astronomy, or the best way to render an algebraic formula into Latin. Imagine the workflow, academic equivalent of assembling a complex piece of furniture with the instructions written in 3 different languages. It was a slow, arduous process, but it was the main pipeline through which the works of Al-Khwarizmi, Avicenna, Averroes, and countless others flowed into the European intellectual bloodstream, fueling what would become the 12th century Renaissance. Another, slightly warmer, channel flowed through the island of Sicily. After centuries of Islamic rule, Sicily was conquered by Norman mercenaries in the 11th century. But the new Norman kings, particularly Roger II, didn't expel the island's Arab population. Instead, they created a unique, hybrid kingdom. You can imagine the court in Palermo. The king himself might be a fair-haired descendant of Vikings, but he would rule using the sophisticated administrative and taxation systems left by his Arab predecessors. His decrees might be issued in Latin, Greek, and Arabic. His royal robes might be embroidered with Arabic script, wishing him good fortune. The Norman kings were the original fusion chefs, but for culture. I'll have the body of a Viking warrior, the architecture of a Byzantine church, the bureaucracy of an Arab emir, and the language of a Roman pope. This syncretic environment was fertile ground for intellectual exchange, most famously producing the Tabula Rogeriana, one of the most advanced world maps of the entire medieval period, created for King Roger II by the great Arab geographer Muhammad al-Idrisi. The final channel was the most violent and contentious one, the Crusades. This was not a friendly exchange of scholars in a library. This was a brutal clash of civilizations. Yet, even in conflict, knowledge is transferred. The European knight and soldiers who traveled to the Holy Land went expecting to find a primitive, savage enemy. Instead, they found cities like Damascus and Jerusalem that were often larger, cleaner, and more technologically advanced than their own. They saw hospitals that were more like secular institutions for healing than the purely faith-based hospices they knew back home. They encountered physicians whose knowledge of herbs, anesthetics, and anatomy was far superior to their own. They brought back not just stories, but objects and ideas. They brought back a taste for new spices and foods, like sugar. When Europeans first encountered sugarcane, introduced to the Levant by Arab traders, they didn't know what it was. Early chroniclers called it sweet salt or a type of honey. Reed that produced a powder as sweet as honey without the need for bees. It was treated as a rare and expensive medicine before it eventually transformed the European diet. The Crusaders also brought back knowledge of military technology, like the design of concentric castles, and an appreciation for the fine, hard steel of a Damascus blade. They returned with a new awareness that their world was not the only one, and perhaps not even the most advanced. It was a humbling and ultimately motivating road trip. So you see, there was no single moment of transmission. It was a slow leak through Spain, a fusion of cultures in Sicily, and a series of violent collisions in the Holy Land. By the end of the 13th century, through these many tangled paths, the foundational texts of Islamic science, medicine, mathematics, and crucially for our story mechanics, were now available in Latin. The seeds of knowledge cultivated for centuries in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba had finally been scattered across European soil. And now, the artisans and engineers of Europe were ready to see what would grow. The seeds of knowledge, cultivated for centuries in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba, had finally been scattered across European soil. And now, the artisans and engineers of Europe were ready to see what would grow. And what grew from those scattered seeds was something new, something different. It was a revolution not of water, but of weight and iron. It was less poetic, perhaps, but it was powerful, and it would set the world on a new course, ticking and clanging its way towards modernity. You must now leave the quiet workshops of the Islamic world and enter the loud, smoky forge of the late medieval European blacksmith. The air here doesn't smell of incense and parchment. It smells of coal smoke, hot metal, and sweat. This is where the next chapter of timekeeping was written. The context had changed. In the booming towns of 13th and 14th century Italy, Germany, and England, a new class of people was on the rise. The merchants, the weavers, the bankers, the artisans. Their time wasn't measured by the slow arc of the sun or the 5 daily calls to prayer. Their time was money. They needed to regulate the workday, to coordinate trade, to know when to open the market and when to close it. This new bourgeois time demanded a new kind of clock, public, loud, and relentlessly regular. The ideas, translated from Arabic, had provided the theoretical underpinning, the advanced mathematics, the understanding of gear ratios, the very concept of complex machinery. But the breakthrough, the killer app of European medieval technology, was the invention of the weight-driven verge escapement. The exact origin of the verge escapement is one of the great unsolved mysteries in the history of technology. There is no single known inventor, no eureka moment recorded in a manuscript. It seems to have emerged organically from the workshops of anonymous craftsmen sometime in the late 1200s. A brilliant solution whispered into existence by the ringing of hammers on a NVILS. This invention changed everything. It untethered the clock from water, meaning it could work in the freezing winters of Northern Europe. It made the clock purely mechanical, a contained system of gears and levers, and it created the first machine with a regular, pulsating beat. You can see one of the first of these new creations being installed in the bell tower of a great Gothic cathedral. But this is not the elegant, multi-talented automaton that Harun al-Rashid sent to Charlemagne. This machine is a monster. It is a colossal skeleton of wrought iron, forged by hand in a blacksmith's fire. Its gears are huge, rough-hewn wheels, their teeth filed unevenly. The whole contraption is bolted onto a massive timber frame. It is loud, crude, and powerful. These first European clocks were the monster trucks of horology. They lacked the delicate poetry of Al-Jazari's work. But you have to admire their brute force, charm. They were built to do one job, and to do it with overwhelming force, and that job was simply to strike a bell. In fact, for the first century or so of their existence, most of these public clocks had no dial, no hands, no face at all. They were built solely to automate the job of the bell ringer, to mark the hours for the town below with a mighty clang. This is even reflected in our language. The word clock comes to us from the Old Dutch and French words for bell, clock, and cloche. A clock, originally, was not something you looked at. It was something you heard. It was a machine that banged. A bell, the technological equivalent of a phone that can only make one loud, scheduled ringing sound, but can't be used to talk to anyone. The men who built these machines were also a new breed of clockmaker. They weren't courtly polymaths with access to royal libraries. They were craftsmen, guild members. They were the locksmiths who knew how to file intricate parts, the blacksmiths who knew the secrets of forging strong iron, and later, the gunsmiths who were masters of metalwork. They were less like scientists and more like the grizzled mechanics who fix heavy machinery. They probably weren't quoting Aristotle while they worked, but they knew how to hit a piece of hot iron with a hammer until it did exactly what they wanted. It was a different, but equally valuable kind of genius. You see this new kind of clock rise in town after town. The great clock at Salisbury Cathedral, whose iron frame still exists today, was built around 1386. A great clock was installed in the tower at Rouen, France, in 1389. The astronomical clock in Prague, with its parading apostles, was first installed in 1410. Each one was a source of immense civic pride, a declaration that this town was modern, orderly, and prosperous. Slowly, these iron giants were refined. Dials were added. Minute hands eventually followed the hour hands. The mechanisms were miniaturized, moving from the bell tower into the homes of the wealthy and eventually into the pockets of the individual. This European path, the one forged in iron and powered by weights, the one that ticked and talked its way through the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, was the one that led directly to the modern world of timekeeping. It was a different, evolutionary branch, but one that proved fantastically successful. This, of course, raises a difficult question. If the science and technology of the Islamic world were so advanced for so long, why did this new European approach to clockmaking take over? Why did the grand tradition of the monumental water clock, the whimsical automaton, and the theatrical spectacle slowly fade into a forgotten art? The reasons are complex, a tangled web of historical forces which we must now try to unpick. This, of course, raises a difficult question. If the science and technology of the Islamic world were so advanced for so long, why did this new European approach to clockmaking take over? Why did the grand tradition of the monumental water clock, the whimsical automaton, and the theatrical spectacle slowly fade into a forgotten art? The reasons are complex, a tangled web of historical forces, which we must now try to unpick. To do so, you can't point to a single thread. There was no single moment, no one reason why the great clocks fell silent and the workshops of the master engineers grew quiet. It was a slow fading, a convergence of external calamities, economic shifts, and changing internal priorities that, over centuries, guided the stream of innovation down a different path. The first and most violent shock to the system was the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. It's hard for us to comprehend the sheer destructive force that was unleashed upon the Eastern Islamic world. You must imagine Hulagu Khan and his armies sweeping out of Central Asia. Their approach to cultural exchange was aggressive. They weren't there to borrow books from the library. They were there to use the library as firewood and its patrons as archery targets. When they sacked Baghdad in 1258, they didn't just conquer a city. They systematically dismantled an entire civilization's heart. The House of Wisdom, the grand libraries, the observatories, the workshops all were annihilated. The Caliph was executed in a shockingly brutal manner, rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses. The irrigation canals that had sustained the region for millennia were destroyed, turning fertile plains into swampland. The devastation set the region back for generations and shattered the system of wealthy courtly patronage that had funded the work of scholars and engineers for 500 years. Even as the Islamic world began to recover from this cataclysm, and new powers like the Mamluks in Egypt and the Ottomans in Anatolia rose. The world around them was changing in other ways. The second thread you must pull is an economic one. For centuries, the great cities of the Middle East had sat astride the world's most important trade routes. The Silk Road from China and the spice routes from India all passed through their lands, and they grew fabulously wealthy by acting as the middlemen. But by the late 15th century, European explorers, sponsored by ambitious monarchs, were looking for a way around them. The high taxes the Ottoman Empire placed on prized goods like pepper and cloves was a huge motivation for countries like Portugal to find a direct sea route to the source. When Vasco da Gama finally rounded the southern tip of Africa in 1498 and reached India, it was the beginning of the end for the old trade routes. Suddenly, Europe could get its spices directly, bypassing the cosmic toll booth of the Ottoman and Mamluk empires. It was the 15th century equivalent of cutting the cord on your cable subscription because you found you could stream everything for cheaper online. It was a brilliant move for the European consumer, but it began a slow economic drain on the great Islamic empires. With less wealth flowing in, there was less state and private money available for grand, expensive projects like building a new elephant clock or funding a massive new observatory. Fiscal priorities shifted towards the military to fend off new threats. The third thread is a more delicate and controversial one, involving a gradual shift in intellectual culture. Historians and sociologists of science are engaged in a long and complex debate about the so-called decline of science in the Islamic world. Some emphasize these external factors of invasion and economics, while others look at internal changes. In intellectual and religious attitudes, the most balanced view sees them as deeply intertwined. Over time, the educational focus in many parts of the Islamic world began to shift more heavily towards the religious sciences, theology, jurisprudence, and Quranic studies, which were taught in the growing network of madrasas. The ancient sciences, like Greek philosophy and theoretical mathematics, which had been so enthusiastically championed by the early caliphs of the House of Wisdom, came to be seen in some influential conservative circles as foreign, suspect, and potentially corrosive to faith. The destruction of Taqi al-Din's observatory is a dramatic example of this tension. While it may have been triggered by politics, the fact that a science is bad luck argument could gain any traction at all shows a change in the cultural climate from the days of Al-Mung, who actively sought out Greek texts. This wasn't universal or sudden stop, but a gradual reallocation of intellectual energy and prestige away from the kinds of speculative inquiry that had produced the Banu Musa and Al-Jazari. Finally, there is the simple, unsentimental logic of technology itself. The monumental water clock, for all its artistic and engineering brilliance, was a technological dead end. It was like the world's most beautiful and elaborate vinyl record player. It was a pinnacle of analog artistry, but its very nature made it difficult to miniaturize or make more precise. The European mechanical clock, by contrast, was like the first crude digital CD. It lacked the warmth and soul of the older format, but it was based on a principle that was infinitely more scalable. The rugged, ticking, iron dand gear-based clock could be shrunk, refined, made more accurate with the addition of springs and pendulums, and eventually mass-produced. It was simply the more adaptable and ultimately more useful technology. So you see, it wasn't one thing. It was a perfect storm. It was the trauma of invasion, the slow drain of economic change, a subtle shift in intellectual priorities, and the emergence of a disruptive new technology from a rival civilization. The grand tradition didn't so much die as it gracefully receded. Its job done. Its greatest secrets already smuggled out to ignite a revolution elsewhere. The grand tradition didn't so much die as it gracefully receded. Its job done. Its greatest secrets already smuggled out to ignite a revolution elsewhere. But to call this art forgotten isn't entirely fair. Its physical forms may have vanished from the world. Its artisans may have no direct successors, but its spirit, its mechanical DNA, all around you, humming silently in the background of your modern life. The echoes of these medieval workshops, of the minds of men like the Banu Musa and Al-Jazari, are hidden in plain sight. In the most mundane and the most sophisticated technologies you use every single day. You just have to know where to look. Let's start with the most important echo of all. The next time you are in a car, turn off the radio. As the engine idles at a stoplight, listen to that low, steady hum. What you are hearing is the direct legacy of Al-Jazari. Remember the crankshaft he designed for his water-raising pumps. That brilliant device for turning the continuous rotation of a water wheel into the back and forth, up and down motion of a piston. In your car's internal combustion engine, that process is happening in reverse, but the principle is identical. A series of small, controlled explosions in the cylinders pushes pistons down, and those pistons are connected to a crankshaft. There, linear up and down motion is translated into the smooth, rotary motion that ultimately turns the wheels of your car. That smooth hum is the sound of Al-Jazari's idea, multiplied by 1,000 and spinning thousands of times per minute. So, as you drive to work or to the grocery store, you can nod sagely to yourself, knowing that a key component of your very modern machine was first perfected in a 13th century workshop in southeastern Turkey. Now think about robotics and programming. You watch a robotic arm on a factory assembly line. It moves with precise, predetermined grace. It swivels, extends, grips, apart, rotates, and places it perfectly over and over again. This sequence of stored instructions is a direct conceptual descendant of Al-Jazari's camshaft and the Banu Musa's mechanical flute player. Remember the pegged cylinder on the flute player, or the lobes on the camshaft that controlled the castle clock's orchestra. That was a physical program. It was a stored set of instructions: lift arm, strike drum, lower arm, written not in code, but in wood and metal. Al-Jazari's automated servant, offering you a towel after you washed your hands, is basically the ancestor of your robot vacuum cleaner. Both are designed to perform a sequence of tasks to make our lives easier. Though one is arguably more elegant and less likely to get stuck under the sofa while making plaintive beeping sounds. There is an ongoing debate among computer scientists and historians about whether to classify devices like the Banu Musa's flute player as the first programmable machine. While it certainly had a stored, alterable program, some argue that true programmability requires more complex logical branching, the if-then statements that are the bedrock of modern code. Others maintain that its ability to store and execute a variable sequence of instructions meets the most fundamental definition of a program. Either way, it stands as a profound early milestone on the long road to the computer on your desk and the phone in your hand. The echoes are in even humbler places. Go into your bathroom. The most brilliant and ancient piece of engineering in that room is probably not your electric toothbrush or your hairdryer. It's the float valve in your toilet tank. When you flush, The water drains and a float drops. This opens a valve, letting fresh water in. As the tank fills, the float rises until, at the perfect level, it closes the valve, stopping the flow. This is a self-regulating, negative feedback system, and it is the exact same principle used by Ctesibius in ancient Alexandria and perfected by the Banu Musa brothers in 9th century Baghdad to ensure their water clocks had a constant, steady flow. Every time you hear your toilet stop filling, you are hearing the ghost of an idea that is over 2,000 years old. An idea that was a cornerstone of the great water clocks of the Islamic Golden Age. It is quiet, reliable genius that asks for nothing and gets almost no respect. The Banu Musa brothers also described and used another humble but critical device in their trick fountains and pitchers, the check valve. A simple one-way valve that lets fluid or gas flow in one direction, but not the other. Today, these unseen little devices are everywhere. They are in the fuel injectors of your car, in medical foredrips to prevent backflow, in the regulator for a scuba tank, in the pump you use to inflate a bicycle tire. It's a simple, brilliant concept they mastered for their whimsical creations that has become an essential, life-saving component of modern engineering. So, you see, the knowledge was never truly lost. It was simply absorbed. It became so fundamental, so deeply embedded in the foundations of our mechanical world that we forgot to look for its origins. The theatrical spectacle of the elephant clock may be gone, but its mechanical heart, the crankshaft, beats on in millions of engines. The whimsical music of the automated flute player has faded, but its principle of stored programs animates the entire digital world. The art is not forgotten. It has just become part of the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the machines that carry us through our lives. The art is not forgotten. It has just become part of the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the machines that carry us through our lives. And so, let your mind drift back from the humming engines and glowing screens of your own time. Pull back from the familiar world of today for one last quiet walk through the halls of this bygone age. The reason this art feels forgotten is not because its engineering vanished. It's because its soul, its theatrical, whimsical, human-like presentation is what faded from view. We inherited the functional skeleton, the crankshafts, and the valves, but the beautiful, animated skin is what now lies behind museum glass. You can imagine yourself in a quiet wing of a modern museum, perhaps the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, or a gallery dedicated to Islamic science. There, in a climate-controlled case, you might see a single, beautifully illustrated page from Al-Jazari's Book of Knowledge. The colors are still vibrant after 800 years. The intricate lines, of the elephant clock are rendered with a watchmaker's precision. Or perhaps you see a heavy brass astrolabe, its surface covered in delicate celestial engravings, now sitting inert and silent on a velvet stand. You can admire their beauty and the genius behind them, but there is a profound stillness, a sense of a captured specimen rather than a living creation in recent decades. However, there have been efforts to breathe life back into these designs. Several modern reconstructions of Al-Jazari's most famous clocks have been built for exhibitions and public spaces around the world. In a shopping mall in Dubai, a full-scale, functioning replica of the elephant clock stands as a tribute to this Golden Age, its automata marking the hours for shoppers and tourists. The 1001 Inventions exhibition, which has toured the globe, has also featured working models of his creations, allowing millions of people to witness their ingenuity firsthand. When modern engineers undertake these reconstructions, they often discover fascinating quirks. They find Al-Jazari's diagrams to be brilliantly clear and logical, but also that he sometimes omits details that a 13th century master craftsman would have simply taken for granted. He might not specify the exact metal alloy to use for a particular gear, or the type of wood best suited to a water-resistant frame, because any competent artisan of his day would have known these things instinctively. It's a small reminder that he was writing not for us, but for his peers in a living, breathing tradition of craft. Of course, even this act of revival is a subject of gentle disagreement. There is a debate among curators and historians about the true value of these modern reconstructions. Some argue they are essential educational tools, bringing the genius of these engineers to a new generation in a way that a static manuscript page never could. Others feel that these polished modern versions, often built with computer-aided design and electric pumps, can never truly capture the authentic spirit of the originals, and may even present a misleadingly clean and simplified picture of the past. It's a quiet debate about how best to honor a history we can no longer touch directly, but these debates are for the waking world. For you, now, the museum is closing. The lights are dimming, the crowds are gone, and the quiet hum of the air conditioning is the only sound. It is time to let these details soften, to let the facts and figures blur into feelings. The sharp edges of history can now dissolve into the soft contours of a dream. Let the names of the caliphs and the dates of the battles drift away like dust motes in a sunbeam. They are not important anymore. What is important is the feeling of wonder. The image of a world where time was not a number to be chased, but a story to be told, a performance to be witnessed. let the intricate image of the castle clock fade from your mind, its golden facade dissolving into a warm, gentle light. Let the ticking of the verge escapement slow down until they are just isolated sounds in a vast and comfortable silence. You can let go of the story now. There is nothing left to learn, nothing more to analyze, just the gentle sensation of drifting on a quiet, slow-moving river. The river carries you away from the workshops and the libraries, away from the clanging of the forge and the soft drip of the clepsydra. The magnificent form of the elephant clock walks slowly beside you for a time, its movements grand and silent, before it turns and fades into a soft gray mist, leaving behind only a feeling of peace and immense unanalyzed grace. The memory of its chiming bell becomes a distant echo, and the sound of its hidden flowing water merges with the soft and steady rhythm of your own breathing, a quiet and ancient current carrying you now towards the deep